Hello everybody, welcome back to Anxiety Chats. Today I'm going to be talking to you about my experience of realising lockdown was going to happen. I thought this was an interesting topic, and I'm currently reading a book called Lucy Lives by the Sea, and it is about a woman who lives in New York, and when the pandemic starts to happen, she moves to a little location by the sea, and her experience of watching New York get hit by COVID and what that means for her and her family and all the emotions that we all, I think, went through together and separately. I thought, whoa, what a mental time we all went through. Like, we all experienced such similar and different lockdowns, and I thought I would share my story of realising this is all about to happen. I lived in Scotland, and so obviously in different parts of the world it was hit at different times, and lockdowns were very different. The first thing I remember was obviously hearing about COVID and knowing that it was in China, in Wuhan, and thinking, God, that sounds awful, but thinking it's probably just kind of like a cold or a flu, not understanding the severity of it at all, not being scared of it. And then realising, I think when I was at home one night, I was watching videos on YouTube and a little documentary came up about the pandemic and about COVID, SARS-2, all of these different names for it. And I was like, I'll just click on it and see what's happening with this whole COVID thing. Like, I think they're blowing out of proportion was my thoughts at the time. And then watching the video of this man who was living in Wuhan, and he was a teacher there, an English teacher, and him basically in a hazmat suit going to the shop, you know, showing the streets of Wuhan, which were completely empty, showing people going to the supermarket and they're being, you know, they were taking their suitcases because they didn't want to go back for a while. It was just like, oh my God. And he was saying in the video, you know, this is going to come to where you live and this is what your life's going to be like for a while. And it feeling so apocalyptic. And that was the first time I remember being actually scared of not necessarily COVID, but I was scared of losing control, not being in control, things changing drastically and being like, okay, well, this man says it's going to happen now. That's kind of scary. And then obviously slowly over time, seeing things changing slightly, seeing people, you know, being scared of each other. Like if you met your friend on the street, kind of talking 2 meters apart, going into supermarkets and it being weird. I remember when I realised, okay, we are going to go into a lockdown. I was with my dad and we were like, let's go to the shop and get like, you know, stuff that can help me stay calm. Things like jigsaws and paint so I could paint my flat, which I never ended up doing. You know, panic buying buckets of paint so that I wouldn't get stressed and I had something to do. And I remember we were leaving in the car and my brother, who lives in London, phoning my dad. My brother lives and works on like really busy streets, like the most popular streets in London, and works at one of the busiest buildings in London. And him saying, I think I'm going to have to move back to Edinburgh for a while this whole thing happens. And me realising, oh my God, this is happening. Like my brother is quite a rational person. He's not somebody that would, you know, worry about things unnecessarily, unlike his sister. And that's when I was like, oh my God, everything is going to change drastically for a long time. And I was in my dad's car and I remember just like basically having a tantrum about how anxious I was. I remember like just being so angry, so upset, so terrified of change and uncertainty. I am somebody that when it's Christmas Day, I get really anxious and stressed that the supermarkets are closed because that's different and it's not the same and I don't like that. I just kind of thought, how the hell am I going to survive this? And I think everyone goes into their own bubble and their own like internal monologue and just think about how it's going to affect them. Like obviously I was terrified of how it's going to affect people with weakened immune systems, older people, people living on their own. I was also living on my own at the time, like knowing that mentally so many people would really struggle with this. And I was in a place at that time where I kind of felt like I was starting to get better from agoraphobia. I was like starting to get on buses for short journeys, but like starting to get back on that, things were starting to improve a bit, and thinking about the fact that I couldn't see my family, I couldn't, go in my dad's car to try and do exposure therapy, or I couldn't go on buses for a while, was horrible and terrifying. And so I stormed out of my dad's car and slammed the door and walked home, like, really annoyed. Obviously not at him. He was just the person I took it out on. And that's really not in my nature to do stuff like that. Like, I don't really get angry very often, but I just felt so angry and just thinking, like I've said, I don't know if I will survive this. How the hell am I going to get over it? Like, how am I going to get through this? And like I said, you kind of go into your own bubble, you get really insular, and you're like, what is going to go on? What's going to happen? And like everybody else, I was watching the news, I had the TV on, and our Prime Minister at the time, Boris Johnson, coming out and saying, everybody needs to stay at home. Do not leave your house unless it's for an hour of exercise a day or to go shopping for essentials. Don't meet other people that are outside of your household. All of these insanely terrifying things that we never ever thought that we would see. I didn't even think about this, like, apocalyptic feeling world. And like any other time in my life, I survived it. And you survived it. And not just from COVID. I have had COVID. It was really rubbish. But the mental aspects of lockdown and coronavirus were mad. Like, they were just so hard. And I really thought, I don't think I'll get through this mentally. And I did. And just like anything, it's kind of nice, like, looking back on this time, and it's kind of a time I forgot about. It was a really long time. Like, we were locked down on and off for basically a year and a half. Yeah, how amazing to survive that. And I think it's something I want to take with me, and hopefully I want you to take with you while we go through our life, thinking, we went through that, and some parts were difficult, some parts might have been nice, some parts might have been, there was a whole different host of emotions and things happening, and people came together. And I think people were more understanding about mental health during that time. I think people were more open. People were, creating WhatsApp groups for their neighborhood to say, I'm going to the shop, I can get you things, I can take your dog for a walk. There was a sense of community at that time where I lived anyway. And I think there's times, there's things from those times that I think we should learn from. I want to learn from, about my own resilience and ability to go through things that are very, very hard and I don't think I'll get through and still get through. I would also really love to hear your story about when you realised things were going to change at that time. We all have a story. We all had similar thoughts and some different thoughts around that time. How do you remember, like, what it was like for you? Where do you live? Was it different from other places? Was lockdown different? I would really love to hear your story about when you realised lockdown was going to happen and COVID was a thing. Thank you for watching this video and listening to my story. And I will see you in the next one. Bye, everybody.